remote work. So COVID-19 pandemic had numerous impacts over our social and economic life, and one area that was majorly transformed is the way we work. Remote work has been promoted as a viable alternative in a socially distanced world. Therefore, our attempt here in this project is to better understand labor and management issues associated with the remote work arrangement. We like to believe that our contributions to this new field or new area of research are associated with the focus on the London economic region. And there are some advantages of focusing our lens on a smaller geographical area instead of losing the specificity of smaller areas versus a greater average, or looking at averages for larger areas. And another thing that we believe it's a contribution here is the fact that we attempted in this research to gather opinions of three main participants to the labor market, which are the employees, the job seekers, and the employers. And our findings that we are going to share will reflect this comparison across these three groups. We start this research with a few exploratory conversations that we had, either individually or in a focus group with each of these targeted groups, employers, employees, and job seekers. And they were very fruitful. Lots of ideas have been driven from those conversations, particularly with employers. They were very, very helpful and with lots of suggestions. And based on those conversations, we focus our lens in this research on these major areas of inquiry. And as you can see, there are 6 major areas that we intended to explore. Are the benefits or the perceived benefits of remote work, perceived cost of remote work, perceived performance, support, management, and job security. The collection, the data collection for the research has been going on between October 6 and November 12, 2021. And you see here the survey collected, and then a few percentages on estimated completion rates, and then useful surveys. So we had 78 employers providing useful information for our analysis, and then 108 employees and 103 job seekers. And here are those findings that we are going to share with you. We start with first area of inquiry, which is the perceived benefits. And our first conclusion from the data that we've seen is that the differences that we are going to see in this information is born from individual and business interests. So you can imagine that job seekers and employees had individual interests versus employers and management have a different perspective on all the questions that we asked in our survey. So there will be areas where these opinions are converging, but in many cases those opinions are divergent. And we can start here with the perceived benefits. We see an alignment of some sort between employees and job seekers. Their most likely benefits that they voted for um, are the increased flexibility, reduced risk of contracting COVID-19, reduce or lack of commuting expenses, and increased focus on work done. So can kind of sense here that idea of individual interest. In contrast, employers had a different perspective. They picked health and safety of the employees, increased productivity of the remote workers, or reorganize how people work. These were most likely benefits perceived by employers. But there were a, a few open-ended questions where we asked people to offer their free options. And additionally, employers acknowledge other benefits, such as benefit of technology forced upon them, the time given to reflect and reorganize processes, broke old habits in apprentices, and in parentheses, I'm sorry, and then more thought on and offering mental health support, improve morale of the employees and others. So all these perceived benefits can be points on a job posting design or on a job description. If there is interest in attracting talent for these remote work positions, definitely we can extract from here a few things that can, or a few pointers that can trigger the attention of employees and job seekers on this, but also flexibility, as we said here, most appreciated by employees and job seekers, could be a motivation point for them, increasing their commitment to the work they do, and consequently an effect upon the labor productivity. And here are the charts with those results. I guess you received a file a few days ago with the presentation, and maybe you had the chance to look over this this information. So I'm going to switch to perceived costs, and you can see here that we have here complete diversity across the three groups in their perceived costs. So employees' top three most likely costs were working more hours, diminished communication, or mental health deterioration. Most of the employers felt that reduced productivity of the remote workers and increase in operational expenses due to accommodating to remote work, loss of business or costs of PPE were most likely encountered costs of remote work. On the other hand, job seekers felt that increase in hardware and software costs, home office expenses, or diminished communications were the top three expected costs of working remotely. And again, we offer the chance to our respondents to offer free responses on this topic, and you can see that there are other costs noted by the three targeted groups, like disconnect with people not on site, declined team spirit, damaging optics for people remaining to work on site, loss of communication, morale challenges, customer relationship declined, increase in traveling costs, IT, phones, and laptops. Again, these perceived costs can be points in reassessing the job design and job descriptions, because there might be elements that are perceived as costs for employees and job seekers, and they may hinder upon the talent attraction or motivation and commitment of these two groups. Again, the data on which we based these conclusions, and you can see across these three groups in a comparative way how these things are aligning or diverging across the groups. I'm not going to insist a lot on these numbers, but we definitely are interested in the size. If we see something more than 50%, it's more than half of the respondents, and it's a stronger response for us than others that will be 1 in 4 or 25%, which is a smaller group of respondents from each of these groups advancing those ideas. But we were also interested in preference for remote work in our region, as we said. And we see here a difference again between employees and employers. So employees were favoring the hybrid arrangement. You see a large majority, 55%, and fully remote working, about 40% of them. And then you see employers having a different perspective. The largest one with 45% was on progressively setting a hybrid form for all qualifying jobs. And all qualifying jobs are gradually returning to full on-site working, about 43%. So the common ground between employees and employers is this hybrid model that is favored by both in large proportions. And then we asked them what kind of arrangement in terms of days of remote work versus days of work in office would they prefer this hybrid form to take place. And you can see here that most of the responses came for between 2 and 3 days of remote work per week, the rest of it being done on site. And again, I'm emphasizing on the idea of implications of those results upon the job design. Now we have a clear expression of preference for remote work. And then we've seen that employers are not necessarily happy with this arrangement, but some of them are willing to make this transition through a hybrid form, and those have implications on how they reorganize their positions and jobs and tasks that are more appropriate for one type of work on site versus remote and so forth. Obviously, those reconsiderations of job design have implications on office design and commercial real estate, and also requires investment in reorganizing this working space. And next we can see here the the votes for each of these groups, employees and employers, and their expressed preference for different types of remote work arrangements and how they spread out or distribute across the sample. So another area, major area in these 6 areas that we pointed out at the very beginning of our presentation is productivity and performance. And there is, as you can imagine, a lot of research done on remote work with a lot of focus and concentration on productivity. We try to mimic somehow what was done before, but with a different direction. But our interest here, because we've seen that employers mentioned productivity loss being a cost, but also an increase in productivity as a benefit. And we've seen that there are smaller percentages than 50% of employers that have been choosing both of them. So in productivity can be a cost and a benefit. We were also considering this divergent perspective of these three groups. We were also interested to see what is the basis, how they assess their productivity. So for that reason, we started asking them, how do you evaluate or estimate your productivity? And you can see here a majority of employees perceive being more productive working remotely than working on site. And about I'm sorry here, I think I went a step further, but so we asked them how do they perceive their productivity. So you see here a majority of employees perceive being more productive, and then in a smaller proportion they perceived as being as productive as working on site. On the other hand, employers felt that the productivity of remote workers remained about the same as before. And there was a slightly larger proportion of employers that felt productivity of remote workers decreased. So there is a different angle or a different view for these two groups. Also, we were interested to see if there is a loss of strength in this perception as we went through different lockdowns through this pandemic. And you can see here remote workers' perceptions of being more productive than on site were stronger earlier in the pandemic, and then later after the second lockdown, which is an interesting observation. Probably the wear down of having those repeated periods of isolation increase their enthusiasm for this type of work. Also, we ask the same kind of things for. We ask employers about the same type of things, about their perception of increased or decreased or equal productivity before or after the first lockdown and after the second one. They maintain, a large majority of employers maintain this idea of remaining about the same productivity as working on site, and with a larger proportion of decreasing versus increasing productivity, and for different categories of ages and then types of worker, being a new type of worker or not. And another observation, I'm sorry here, I cannot control this.
Call from 416-941-0408. This is the benefit of having a home office, right, Emilian?
Yes.
It's okay. It's not that loud for me, so I don't think don't worry. It's not as loud probably as it is for you.
Okay. So you see here, with an overwhelming majority, 19% of job seekers were convinced that they can effectively do the their remote work. Again, I cannot stress out how many implications those findings have on motivation, job design, performance assessment metrics and rewarding systems. Again, the data support for these conclusions that we advanced here is something for you to explore even after our conversation here, because we are limited on our time here. We are not going to insist a lot on those charts. We asked employees about what kind of uncertainties affected their productivity during this period of time. And you can see here, employees felt that technology emulating face-to-face interaction was the most likely uncertainty that affected their productivity. And then permanency and duration of remote work arrangement was the second most likely factor that affected their productivity. And about 25% 25% of remote workers indicated that people preference for remote work was a third likely uncertainty that affected their productivity. Others suggested uncertainty affected, another suggested the uncertainty affecting productivity of remote workers was connectivity. And here, the implications that I've seen are most likely on educating the public about those preferences and about the viability of the remote work and where it's working well, and ensuring job seekers about the permanency and duration of remote work that could be almost equal with other remote with other work arrangements, and about the future of remote work that we are all interested to exploit the benefits of this new work arrangement. Again, the chart that supports these conclusions, as you can see, technology was the major 51% of respondents consider that as being the most important uncertainty affecting their productivity during this period of time. We, as I was starting to say, and went ahead of the presentation a bit, but I was saying that we were interested to see if these misalignments or divergence in opinions is coming from a different way of assessing productivity. We asked these three groups how they assess their work. But there is a common ground across these three groups. All agreed that assessment of remote work productivity should be a multi-dimensional assessment, considering output, quality, and time. Employees and job seekers appear more concerned with the quality of work, whereas the employers are more interested in output. And you can see here the top three ways in which remote workers estimated their productivity by the quality of their work, number one, and then by the number of and quality of the products and services produced per month, and the time spent producing them, number two, and then by the number and quality of products and services produced per month. And you can see that quality transpire across these three options of remote workers. On the other hand, the top three ways in which employers estimated productivity of remote workers were time, outcome, and quality. Outcome and quality based, and then outcome. And you see here that outcome seems to be more of a common theme across these first three choices. Also, you have to consider the diversity of industries in which these respondents, from which these respondents are coming from. Some of them being in a way more um, uh, um, inclined towards the services sector versus more of the manufacturing services and other variations like this that influences this idea of um, the basis on which they evaluate productivity. So the most likely ways in which job seekers expected to be evaluated on their remote work were based on quality of projects and services delivered, um, number of projects and services delivered, or number and quality of projects and or services delivered. So implications are most likely on performance metrics and motivation and rewards. Immediately after performance assessment is coming the rewards. And here are the charts that are supporting these things. Again, we see here groups of responses that are less than 50%, which means smaller than a majority have been voting for these different types. So it's a more diversity in what we see as responses under this type of question. How do you estimate your productivity? Other suggested criteria to use for performance assessment: using multiple criteria for evaluation, distinguishing between one-time clients and multiple instances or repeat clients, team satisfaction, outputs, projects, deliverables, client testimonials, quotas, client satisfaction, meeting targets, communicating goals and expectations clearly, quality of work, complexity of work, engagement, collaboration, getting the work done in a timely fashion. So we see here a diversity of criteria that can be used, again, based on the industry, the size of the workforce working remotely versus the workforce working on site, and other factors that can contribute to designing a better way of assessing remote work. When employers were asked about open-ended opinions regarding the productivity of remote workers, the following considerations have been noted. Considering a compressed working week of 4 days of remote working, particularly in the context of a difficulty in separating work from life activities. That's something to consider. If people feel that they are working more, maybe 4 weeks of working more, 4 days of working more per week, it's something to consider. Increase attention to the fine line between work and home life activities, which needs to be well balanced. Customer care is somewhat challenging for remote workers. Again, a reconsideration of what kind of tasks and activities are more appropriate for remote work. So redesigning jobs. Mental health, childcare, remote child education, and care for other family members are things that complicates daily balance of remote workers. Remote workers were more productive than working on site. Clear and concise communication of the expectations regarding productivity is essential. Also, constant engagement with remote workers mandatory to make workers feel in touch or connected. So I would propose here to stop my talking, and I would ask you if you have questions or any kind of comments of this first part of the presentation. We definitely have another 3 areas of investigation that we announced at the beginning. So I invite you, if you have questions, about this part, let me know.
Emilian, there was a question a little bit earlier on in your presentation. It was on slide 9 that you had. one of the questions was they were wondering about, they said, so the information is perceived and not actual, because on that slide, it was where it was saying like the perceived kind of like opinions and stuff like that. So that was the question that we received.
Yeah, it's a very complicated question in a way, and very simple in another way. In a way, whenever we ask about opinions or we ask people to offer their opinions, it's a um, subjective way of assessing things. Whenever we can measure ourselves, the results of certain behaviors of people, that would be an objective way of assessing. So in most of the surveys, we ask people about what they think about their actions, and then that is what we captured here in this survey. We asked them what are the most likely costs, but these costs are, or benefits of remote working, are what people perceived as being cost. It's not that we measure some objective outcome that will tell us this was how much people spend in order to adapt to their or this much money have been spent by people to maintain their productivity of the work. So that's my take on that. I'm not sure if that satisfies the person that asked.
Yeah, that's great. That makes sense to me. The other questions that we had was just asking about if the slide deck will be sent out. And yes, it will, as well as the report itself that the presentation is being drawn from, and the recording as well. So all of this will be shared back out with you. And that's all the questions that we got for right now, unless anybody has any other ones. Somebody said, it will be interesting to know if the actual productivity from remote work was improved or not.
Definitely, our research here has its limitations, and I'll go over a few of those. And this could be one of the limitations. I didn't capture that in my list, but definitely some of those measures that we use here are subjective, but there could be objective measures engaging groups of, of employers to assess the number of projects or the number of tasks that they accomplished during a period of time, and then compare that with something that they have been doing before the pandemic. So it's a bit more complex, but it's not impossible. It's doable. Just have to find the right group of employers interested in performing such research where objective measures are applied in assessing productivity.
And I think that's all the questions for now, Emilian, so you can continue.
So and the fourth area of interest for us was support. If people felt supported during this period of time, and what kind of support they received. And you see here both regional employees and employers acknowledge the unprecedented support they received and provided respectively. A large majority of remote workers, about 85%, indicated that they received the expected support from their employer to achieve their full potential while working remotely. This is amazing, I would say, for our region to have this this extraordinary perception that they have been supported to do well their work while being isolated. Socially, it's fantastic. Job seekers align their support expectations with employees and employers. So the top three most likely forms of support received by remote workers were received equipment and software from their employer, talking one-on-one with their manager at least once per week, or engaging in team building activities organized by their employer. On the other hand, employers most likely bought teleconferencing subscriptions for their employees, finance immediate needs of equipment and technology, or communicated clearly the expectations while working remotely. In somewhat opposite order than the support provided by employers, wannabe remote workers favored the following list of expected support: clearly communicate the performance expectations, provide performance equipment and software, or at least once per week, have one-on-one conversation with management. When this question of support has been open-ended, remote workers mentioned that their employers provided training and upskilling, extended hours of IT support, access to social platforms, equipment and supplies, while employers confirm financial support for equipment, software, or supplies, as well as social support through celebration of personal success or organizing fun events. So here again, many pointers for implications on job design, motivating, motivation management, engagement, and also a point where it should be thought as a realignment of managerial actions with the remote workers and job seekers' expectations. That's an important point where all these opinions can be brought together to basically have the same unique purpose, performing well the job. So here again, the charts that will support this. You see large percentages here, over 50% groups with those things, less for job seekers, and more diversity on that side, and more concerted opinions on employees and employers. And here is that fantastic result where 85% of the employees responded that they felt supported during this period of time, and which is an amazing result for our region. Incentives or expected incentives, remote workers and job seekers looking somewhat agreed on the expected incentives. The top three most likely expected incentives for remote workers were training and personal development, team building activities and career advancement. On the other hand, job seekers' top three most expected incentives were training and personal development, financial rewards discretely distributed across jobs, and career advancement. And we can see why the second choice for these two groups differ in a certain way. Financial rewards discretely distributed across jobs, it's something that probably job seekers are very much interested, since they don't have an income at the point when they apply. Other suggested incentives by employees were work ethic, business coaches, better understanding the COVID-19 context, passion for the job, time off recognition to compensate for extra burden of Zoom conversations, and flexibility in the workday hours would be productivity incentives to consider. Job seekers mention that fair compensation will do the job of motivating them. Implications on, again, designing jobs, spaces, and how people work, and mostly from the perspective of attracting people, considering the labor shortages that a lot of areas and geographies are experiencing right now. Maybe some of these results can be converted in something that will convince people more and attract more for applying on various such positions that can be done remotely. Also compensation systems, and because a lot here was associated with financial rewards and being compensated fairly and having a career advancement. So compensation systems and career advancement implications of those results. The charts that support these conclusions, because the top expected incentive for these two groups was the training and professional development. We were interested to capture, if any, types of subjects in which they would be interested to receive, particularly in the context of working remotely. So the top three choices for training and professional development for remote employees and wannabe remote workers were aligned. And you can see here the top three choices of training and professional development for remote workers were efficiently use the teleconferencing software, employee wellness, or communication. And the wannabe remote workers prefer the same group of training and personal development subjects, but in a reverse order. It started with communication, employee wellness, and efficiently use the teleconferencing software. Other suggested areas by employees for training and development were fun interactive activities, website and social media, budgets and financials, and incorporating physical activity into daily routines, while job seekers were suggesting equity and leadership training would be helpful for them. Implications definitely on training and professional development for remote workers. The charts that support these answers for these two groups, employees and job seekers. Management style, another area of interest for that we started with. Somewhat troubling, we've seen in these results that only 1 in 3 employers admitted changing their management style to fit closer to remote work. That's a bit worrying in some ways, in other ways not necessarily, because many employers will have both types of workforce, on-site workforce versus off-site workforce, and depending on the proportions of those two sides of the workforce, they would probably feel the need to change more radical or not. But again, there is something to be learned from here. Those who admitted changing their style, they suggested that they changed it by developing creative teams, becoming more open to remote work, more relaxed and involved in the personal life of their employees, dividing managerial tasks between on-site and online, and assigning separate persons to supervise each, providing mental health counseling services, setting up outcome-oriented goals and leveraging technology to track them, communicating verbally and virtually to ensure that everyone is getting the information, being more sensitive to employees' issues, and ensuring that social supports are available, using more than one channel of communication, verbally, email, telephone, etc., and then scheduling more group or one-on-one virtual check-ins than otherwise. It would require in-person communication and staying more often and longer connected virtually with employees. Implications for management. And here is that unexpected result on the idea of changing the management style. We were also interested in capture if there are any organizational challenges that were developed by these unexpected new work arrangements, which is remote work. So the top three challenging areas for employers associated with remote work were properly motivating employees, onboarding new employers, and effectively training employees. And you kind of guess that this might be true as we progress through various areas of investigation in this research. I'm sorry. So there are implications on motivation, onboarding, training, and professional development. And here is the figure that will support the results that the conclusions that we just reviewed. Considerations for the future. Almost half of employers consider redesigning jobs and activities to better fit the remote work arrangement. In significantly smaller proportions, about 25% of employers consider either building hoteling stations for full or hybrid remote workers and or changing the performance assessment metrics for remote workers. Other considerations here for the future were increased focus on culture and mental health, wellness support, and always have outreach and hoteling. This has direct implications upon redesigning work, workspaces, and organizations. Again, the results supporting these conclusions. And this is team building activities. This was the most frequently solicited area of interest by employers when we had this exploratory conversation. So we asked them, what would you like to hear from us at the end of this research? And they would say, I would be interested in finding out what other employers and managers have been coming up with in supporting as a team building activity the remote work. And you have here quite a list, a rich list of potential solutions in terms of team building activities. You see here often was mentioned these coffee chats, virtual coffee breaks, software training meetings, 4 10-hour days with a day off, full company morning meetings, and once a month a free lunch day, social breaks and birthday celebrations. Everyone had to speak about their professional and personal life. Zoom meetings, monthly or weekly or daily, and then funding for conferences and special events, paid lunches for special occasion at outdoor venues or delivered home, and shared virtually, like birthday, retirements, baby showers, wedding showers, Christmas and other occasions, socially distanced backyard get-togethers, team lunches, virtual games. Zoom games, Zoom around the room, I Spy, work, supplies, trivia, and others, virtual potluck lunches, theme days, everyone dresses up accordingly and send pictures to the group, and participated in Mud Run as a team. So lots of ideas to inspire for your future team building activities here. In terms of the job security, you see here almost 90% of remote employees felt that remote work is a viable long-term alternative to previous work arrangements. About 2 in 5 remote workers, which is about 40% of job seekers, felt that the remote work is suited for full-time work, while about 20% of job seekers believe that remote work is better fitted for part-time work. And the data supporting the conclusions. So I said there are some limitations in our work here. We acknowledge this by saying that the sampling method that we used wasn't a random sampling method. It was mostly a convenience or web crowding sampling method. But as you probably heard and viewed, this type of surveying method is more and more embraced by powerhouses like Stats Canada and other such surveying powers. It's becoming more acceptable in the way of informing us to take decisions. We said that this is an exploratory study. We try to capture some thoughts and ideas that we or people in our area have been experiencing during this period of time. The topic itself, it remains a daily changing one. So every day we will have a different perspective and something building up on our knowledge about the remote work. And then the sample size, it's another limitation. We had about 100 target for each of these 3 groups. Probably larger sample sizes will make this conclusion even more powerful. And our recommendations were spread out across all this presentation. When we said implications, it's even it was similar with the recommendation. But given the uniqueness nature of remote work and considering the proportions of remote workers relative to your workforce, it is recommended that serious consideration should be given to redesigning, reorganizing work, jobs, and spaces to better fit the hybrid work arrangements or fully remote work. And managerial adjustments should be considered for the incentives and reward systems, training and personal development, performance metrics, management style, onboarding new employees, and communication systems. And in order to alleviate these limitations that we acknowledged earlier, we also recommend to expand the research efforts to overcome these limitations, as well as to widen the perspectives on remote work associated issues. And that was what I had to share so far. So I'll open the floor for questions if you have.
Thanks so much, Emilian. While you were presenting, we didn't get any additional questions since the first question break you had. But I'll just give it a moment and see if anybody wants to ask a question or inquire about anything that you shared. And also, we have on the screen Emilian, Bashir, and my email. So when all of this content is shared back out with you, if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. Okay, and for the moment, it doesn't look like we have any questions. We do. Okay, so somebody asked, did work from home employees mention any supports that are needed when having to help school-age children with learning?
Not that I'm aware of, but definitely it's an area of consideration for expanding this work in the future. Yeah, definitely those supports that are needed for remote workers are very, very important to consider by employers and also managers and the society in general. If we are to transit more and more towards this type of employment.
There was another, well, just an additional question there, Emilian, too. If there was any supports that were needed that was mentioned about childcare implications.
We didn't go this specific. Again, we try to capture the main types of supports that again, job seekers or employees have been receiving, and whatever the employers have been providing. And from the earlier conversations that we had with these focus groups or individual conversations with the employers and again, the other two groups, we kind of narrowed down to very large types of support. So we didn't go to this, again, to this depth of investigation on the childcare in particular.
Okay. Any other questions from anybody? Just give it another second. While everybody's just thinking if they have any other questions, I just want to put up an exit poll to just see your satisfaction with the remote work study. So feel free to answer this while anybody's looking for any questions, or feel free to answer this while anybody's thinking of any questions and or on your way out of the meeting. And like I said, everything will be shared back out with you. And thank you so much again today for being here. And Deb said this could be a good conversation starter for discussion with teams at work, which is very true. Hopefully that's what, yeah, we'll use it, that it could be used for using it in the future. And someone said, thank you, Emilian. Thanks for the explanation of the study. Okay, and I think that everybody who's going to answer the poll has answered the poll. So thank you so much for that. And thank you everybody for being here today. Thanks so much for your participation and your support of this project and of the Workforce Planning Board. And we'll be in touch with more content. Thank you so much again. Thank you, everyone.